Item 9 is the motion, Huizar Koretz, relative to the transfer and appropriation of $215,000 in funding to the City Clerk to conduct a pilot online voting program in 2019 for up to 10 neighborhood councils and for the City Clerk to report with a plan for conducting the 10 NC elections.
All right. So, come on. Well, yeah, let's go ahead first and take the public comment. What's your name, sir? Wayne. Okay, come right on up. And is there a Michael Skiles on this matter? Yes. Okay. So come on up, and you'll have 1 minute to speak on this matter.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Wayne Neal. I am an area director for the Delray Neighborhood Council. I'm also an advocate for this particular endeavor because it will lead constituents in my jurisdiction, as well as those throughout Los Angeles, to become more engaged in the political process within LA County, or LA City, my apologies. Furthermore, it'll be able to benefit the youth in the community because they'll be able to engage in the process of debate management as well as development for this particular endeavor. And therefore, I speak for myself, but hopefully there are more within the Neighborhood Council program that would also agree. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Skiles, president of UCLA's Graduate Students Association and on the Northwestwood Neighborhood Council Formation Committee, speaking on behalf of myself. So I wanted to very strongly support giving this pilot program for online voting a chance. I definitely think it's the future of voting. We see the direction our country's headed in. It's in large part due to the youth vote not voting, and we need to work to change that. And unfortunately, we're in a generation where we don't use mail. Millennials don't. We pay our bills online. We register for classes online. Heck, we even meet our partners online. And so a lot of us don't even carry stamps. And so when you got to go to the post office, buy stamps before you're able to vote, you've created a barrier. And in Westwood, we saw that translate to students not voting by mail. We saw thousands of people in line to vote, very, very long lines that discourage hundreds from voting. So we'd like to change that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, is Patty Berman here, who will be followed by Marcus Lovingood? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Patty Berman. I'm the president of the Downtown Los Angeles Neighborhood Council, and I would like to speak in favor of this program most vehemently. Neighborhood councils were created because every neighborhood was different and their needs were different. If you take a look at my area, putting a single polling place somewhere in downtown for 6 hours, hoping that my 500,000 people who work here and 65,000 people who live here will be able in any sense to get to that place is not feasible. The online voting gives my stakeholders a chance to not be disenfranchised, and it's very important to us that they have an opportunity to vote. Will they all vote? Of course not. But if it is made so difficult, then they won't vote at all. LA doesn't have that great a track record for attracting people to vote, so making it more difficult is not acceptable. Let's do something to make it more modern and more easy to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lovingood, followed by Sean Starkey.
Thank you, members of the committee, for letting me speak in support of approving the pilot program to bring online voting to LA. My name is Marcus Lovingood, and I'm a stakeholder here in downtown. And I not only live here, but I run my theater education business in the beautiful historic core. The one thing my generation wants to do in these troubling times is to participate. But because voting is so restrictive, they feel disenfranchised, like Patty had said. Sometimes working 2 jobs or having to hop from apartment to apartment because of rent fluctuation makes it even harder for us in downtown LA to get to the polls. By approving online voting, especially this pilot, we can send a message that we encourage participation and are not roadblocks for progress. By not allowing this, we'll be known as a body that allows restricting voting. We don't communicate via mail anymore, we communicate with this. Let's encourage the vote, let's be a beacon of progress, and let's bring LA into the 21st century with online voting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Starkey.
Good afternoon, Chairman KREKORIAN and council members. My name is Sean Starkey. I am here on behalf of Councilmember Jose Huizar and in support of this item. I understand that the City Clerk is on a tight timeline to get ready for next year's elections, so we are very appreciative of you taking this up today. Online voting has been very well received in our downtown area, where it has increased voter participation, and we want to see them to continue to have access to it. I also hope that this opportunity is also available to other neighborhood councils who wish to use it. We recognize that not all neighborhood councils want to use online voting. We simply wish to have it available to those who want access to this choice. I know the online platform needs to be updated, and we support continuing a limited pilot program and allow up to 10 neighborhood councils who want to participate the opportunity to opt into the program. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Walcott and Ms. Liu, are you participating in this as well? Come on up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Holly Walcott, City Clerk. With me is Chris Garcia of my election staff.
Good afternoon. Gracie Liu, General Manager for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment.
So the City Clerk did agree to take on this with a couple of conditions, and number one is that we had enough time to pull it off, and we're pretty much at drop dead this week because our system staff needs at least 6 months to make sure that it'll work, because I will not go into a situation where I do not believe we can make it work and would at any time, if I thought it wasn't going to work, I would pull the plug. We have been working with the vendor Everyone Counts that we selected under RFP, and they have a new system that is currently online, which is why we did not do the build last year. I believe, I can't remember if it was Budget and Finance or Mr. Rue's committee that I had reported that to, why we did not do the build out last year. So the build out is now ready to go for, I mean, we're ready to start the build out, but we would need the time and the money to move forward. We have asked to do only 10, don't want to do any more than that, because we want to make sure any endeavor would be successful. Included in the motion were a number of report backs that we will be happy to answer in writing within the time period stated, and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Liu, anything you want to add at this point?
I'm here to answer any questions about election outreach.
Okay. So, first of all, I appreciate your comments about the timing. Can you make this work now? If we were to pass this through committee and through council, do you feel like you can still administer this election in these elections in a fair way?
Yes, because what we would do is we would move the 10 that we were doing online, we would move them to the very end. So they would pull up the 13th.
We would create a new region. I'm sorry, Chris Garcia, City Clerk Elections. We would plan to create a 13th region and hold that date tentatively on election on June 20th.
Which gives us the 6 months between now and filing to get the system up.
Okay.
And get us a chance to test it and everything.
Okay, great. And how many vendors responded to the RFP?
Gracie, I don't remember. 3, 4?
The initial RFP, 3, but only 2 were seriously vetted. And then, as I mentioned before, we selected Everyone Counts based on their record of online secure elections and the fact that they handle the elections for the Oscars. And the other vendor we did not select because their servers were in Russia, and we felt that that was not safe, even before all of this the last couple of years.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to telegraph my pass here a little bit, members, and then I'll leave it to you. I mean, you've all heard me rail about this a lot, but I'm also very sensitive to the comment that Mr. Starkey made, and I agree that we have 96 different, sets of interests across the city, and every neighborhood is unique. We have more neighborhood councils coming online. Their interests are going to be unique, and I recognize that not all are the same. For some, this may be the greatest thing since sliced bread. For some, like some of the neighborhood councils who have experienced this in my own district, it is doomed to be an absolute disaster. But that's why we have pilot programs. And so I'm going to be okay with checking this out with a pilot program for these 10, but I want to highlight a couple of my biggest concerns, and then I'm going to leave it up to my members to discuss further. Number one is a neighborhood council election is unlike any other election that exists. We don't have registered voters, number one. That's the first. We don't have a clear definition on what a voter is, who votes, or even who can run in these elections. We have, it is 96 now, right? Or am I behind?
They're 97, but there'll be 99 by October.
There will be nearly 100 neighborhood councils with nearly 100 sets of bylaws and election rules. And definitions of who is a stakeholder. So the idea of taking that and putting it into an online format that makes sense, to me, it continues to be a recipe for a fair amount of disaster. It might work out well for some, but it might be a terrible, terrible mess for others. And the burden that this puts onto our clerk is gargantuan. So problem number one, I don't know how we figure out registration. I don't know how we handle figuring out who gets to vote, what proof you have to demonstrate that you are eligible to vote, and then how to maintain the confidentiality of that very personal information in an online format. In Studio City, we had the very clear evidence of what can happen when that is not well handled. People's personal information was made public. Social security numbers, driver's license numbers, utility bills were made public and available to anyone in the world online in the course of registering for an online election. I don't know what much worse of a breach of security you can have than that. So that's problem number one. Number two is neighborhood council elections are especially prone to being contested because much about neighborhood councils is a very contentious process. And when you have groups of people who are fighting hard over 25 votes, there are apt to be lots of contentious debates. So auditability of election results and verifiability of the results without a paper trail this is part of a national conversation about online voting, and it's especially pronounced in situations like this. So I hope that the result of the pilot program will be some very strict guarantees of auditability of results and a process by which a challenge can be thoroughly and respectfully taken up and considered and resolved. And then finally is cost. We're going to spend on this pilot program, the proposal is to spend over $200,000. How much right now is budgeted for outreach for our neighborhood council elections? Ms. Liu.
We have 300,000 that's the city council set aside in the UB, and there's 70,000 that we received in the initial Blue Book, and there's approximately $25,000 left over if from this fund if City Clerk takes the $215,000.
Okay, so less than $400,000 for the entire city of Los Angeles to do election outreach. And we're talking about spending over $200,000 to have online elections so that people will find it easier to vote by using their phones. That's all well and good, but if no one knows that an election is happening, if no one has ever heard of their own neighborhood council, if no one knows that they're a stakeholder, if no one knows when the election is happening or what the procedure is for voting, the ease of using your phone to do that is going to be of zero value. So outreach, to me, is the secret in getting people to participate in neighborhood council elections. Outreach and making people feel that they have a meaningful choice that will result in meaningful outcomes in a neighborhood council election. And that's far more important than the supposed barriers of entry of voting because it's too hard to go someplace to vote compared to voting on your phone. So I just, until we actually have more than 100 people voting in every neighborhood council across Los Angeles, I think discussions about ease of voting are ludicrous. Until we have more than 0.1% of people in this city who even know we have a neighborhood council system, I think the idea of ease of voting is a waste of breath. So that's my miniature rant. But I'm pleased to be moving forward with this and hopefully resolve some of these issues. But just know that I am a hard sell on this, and I think that our failure so far has been to convince people to vote. It hasn't been that we've prevented them from voting, it's that we are not convincing them to vote. And that's, to me, the far more important first step. So with that, members, I open this up for your discussion. Mr. Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agreed with much of what you said and appreciate your analysis and your concerns. I want to thank the gentleman from Del Rey for coming down. If there's any place in my district I want to see online voting, it's Del Rey, which has some of the lowest participation in neighborhood councils. And the second would be West LA. But I'm very concerned about this, and I've heard positive things from some parts of my district and neighborhood councils and negative from others. Let me ask a couple questions. The motion before us asks three things. Transfer the money, tell you to go ahead and get started on this, and come back and answer some of our questions later. Why would we do the first two things before the third thing?
Because of time. If I don't have the money this week, if I'm not moving forward with the contract, it's dead. There's no coming back.
So
you could for future elections.
Right. My concern about this
It's dead for 2019.
is similar to all the points Mr. KREKORIAN raised. I have contested elections all the time in my district, as Gracie knows. And there always is, or generally, there is a theme that somebody sort of created their own electorate. 10 years ago, it was that the developer of Playa Vista gave beer and pizza to the construction workers and got them to vote in the Westchester Neighborhood Council. A few years ago, it was social service agencies bussed in homeless people from around the west side and got them to vote in the Venice Neighborhood Council. Then last year, it was all the restaurant owners got their employees and customers to vote in the Neighborhood Council. How does this not intensify that problem? If we don't have registered voters, how does, for example, how would this not allow someone to sit on the Venice Boardwalk and just get a bunch of tourists to vote in the Venice Neighborhood Council election?
It doesn't, but the current system doesn't either.
Well, the current system means you would have to take all of those folks and get them to hop on a bird scooter, apparently, and go to the Oakwood Rec Center to vote. Under this, people could be doing it live en masse. I mean, you could get a couple thousand people on a Sunday afternoon, right?
Theoretically, I'm not sure how likely that is, given that people don't show up to vote now, as Mr. KREKORIAN pointed out. I don't know that this is the election that people necessarily game more than any other elections. I mean, the history in this country of gaming elections has gone on for hundreds of years.
Let me push back on that a bit, because I am the recipient of change.org petitions on absolutely everything, from development proposals to the color of the sky. And no matter how intensely local the issue, without fail, there are always people from Virginia. I don't know why Virginia, but there's always people from Virginia voting. So I
think that the definition of stakeholders needs to be tightened up. That's kind of the largest issue that we've had throughout the neighborhood council elections, has been the definition of interested stakeholder, because you could make an argument, right or wrong, you can make an argument on how somebody in Virginia might have a stake in your Venice Boardwalk. I visit there 20 times a year, and it would be hard not to accept that as a.
I know. I agree the problem of stakeholder needs to be fixed. What I'm concerned about is putting this cart before that horse of fixing it. It's to me, it's like you have it's a problem if you have a leaky roof. It's another thing if you have a leaky roof and you spray a hose on your roof. And I'm just afraid of that happening here and poisoning not just whatever the particular election is, but poisoning what is, I think, a very, very good idea. Like, I think some of our neighborhood councils absolutely need this, and I'm afraid if we start it without the right safeguards in place, it'll kill it for a generation.
It's kind of a chicken and egg argument, though, in that if you don't build it, you can't start to fix any of the issues unless you've already built the system. So you can't put in the safeguards until the system is actually there. We can't build a system until we've secured a vendor and have obligated to pay the vendor. So I can't.
But the system can't address what I just talked about.
No, that's a process. That's part of the process that we would have to build into how documentation is received, which neighborhood councils are ultimately selected, because there's more. Right now, there's 22 interested, and we only have slots for 10. Yeah. So, safeguarding people's information, as Chairman KREKORIAN pointed out, is key, but also how we treat each of those voters. But that very same issue, and these were paper elections, came up in Koreatown, this most recent subdivision, and it's still an ongoing issue for historical cultural, that everybody is always saying, well, somebody else did not have the right to vote.
Right.
And the city clerk is always going to take the most liberal definition to allow the most people to vote.
Right.
Can I also add as well, with online voting, for the self-affirmation voters, you still needed to provide a photo ID, which is actually more, it was more proof that was than if you went to the at-polls election. So right now, if you're self-affirmation, you can just show up and say, I am who I am.
So how does the ID thing work with this? Are people going to be scanning their ID?
They can either scan or, we also had, pop-up voter registration where we could, at the spot, look at it and then register them. So that thing about taking a tablet to Venice Beach and starting to just randomly register people, you wouldn't be able to do that without City Clerk still vetting that person at the very end. The reason we had to add a picture ID for online voting was so that if they voted online, they wouldn't then come to the polls and vote again. So that was a major change for online voting for self-affirmation. So right now, with at-poll self-affirmation, anyone can come and vote.
So it's a Sunday afternoon. Somebody asked me to vote. I put my photo ID in. I go somewhere else 3 hours later. How does the system stop me from voting the second time?
On the online system, you wouldn't be able to go somewhere else. What do you mean by going somewhere else to vote?
Use the same ID a second time? No, it cross-checks. System cross-checks.
Yeah.
By name, by address.
By birth date.
Mr. BLUMENFIELD.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I like always trying to find new technologies to make voting easier and to make governance easier. I share some of the concerns. I think most of the concerns, though, are about the bigger issues in terms of what is a stakeholder, how do we define that. We've been trying to do that for a number of years, and we still haven't mastered that. And that's a problem, and it will be accentuated via online voting, but it's not. I don't think it gets solved or unsolved with online voting. There's just more, which is more in some cases is better. So I'm also concerned about the money aspect that we talked about. There's $215,000 for all. You were saying it's $400,000. I thought it was $215,000 for all of the outreach for neighborhood councils.
It is if you add everything up and we're able to get the 25,000 that's in this account that online voting is coming from, then it would be 400,000
400,000.
for election
400,000 for
outreach.
outreach, 215 was, it's different pots, but I don't want to oversimplify it, but there were different accounts in the unappropriated balance. One of them had 200, and I don't want to do the math right now, 240? Okay.
I believe that's the count you're looking at.
Yeah.
But the
And
other-
we're taking 215 of that, the remainder of which, 25 of which goes to her outreach and helps make up the entire 400.
So for the 90 neighborhood councils that are not going online, the average amount of money that we're going to spend on outreach is going to go from, what was it last year, and what will it be then this year?
For outreach, yeah, so last election cycle, we probably only had about 200,000 for outreach citywide. So we have more this time, but we know that citywide outreach requires a lot more resources than what were provided. So what we're doing is we are trying to maximize the outreach with a lot of digital ads. We're also, but it's not all high tech. We're trying to do low tech things, low tech collaborations as well with nonprofits and schools in order to get to their databases. So how we are going to be splitting the 400,000 is portion of that is going to go to citywide outreach, and then we're actually going to help those neighborhood councils in the last 1 or 2 election cycles who have really not been able to get any candidates or had very significant low voter turnout. We want to work with 30 of those neighborhood councils to focus some outreach. So additional 50,000 will just be focused on those 30 neighborhood councils.
So like 10 neighborhood councils will get the intense spending, the other ones won't get any additional spending.
30 neighborhood councils would get the more intensive spending, additional 50,000 towards their outreach in order to, kind of just get them on the map in terms of elections.
Right.
And then the remainder will go citywide.
Gotcha. And in terms of the protecting the data and those issues, are we just relying on the vendor, or do we have additional auditing capabilities?
Well, right now, to kind of recap what happened the last time, when we were using Everyone Counts, their voter database was not ready. So there was an individual who was not at the department at this time, at the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, who decided that they would build their own QuickBase database to feed into the election system, rather than delay the online election. So number one, that would be your first error. You wouldn't build an in-house database. Second, the access to this in-house database was given out. So it was not the vendor's issue. It was an internal process where the information was downloaded and sent out. So when we have people registering later on during that year, the vendor system did come online, and at that point in time, we had the database. But there was a limited access to it. You don't allow everybody to have access to the database. Similarly, while some information is public record in the county's voter database, you don't download everything. Now, what we also did to protect people's information was, for example, let's say you're a document-required neighborhood council. We didn't keep your data. We looked at it. Once you were verified, we purged the data to ensure that that data couldn't be subsequently taken. But we would still have to work with the vendor to make sure that all of your security concerns are answered. But the number one thing you do, just from an ongoing election professional, is you limit the access to the data to begin with.
Mr. Ender?
Yeah, 2 quick questions. We don't know who the 10 are yet?
What's that?
We don't know who the 10 would be yet?
We do not know, because we have 22 who've asked for it. So we've got to come up with a method by which to... decide which 10.
See, now, if you had said yes and Del Rey is one of them, you would have made my choice a lot
I
easier.
don't see Del Rey on my list. I don't think they've asked for it.
Dude, you
I've
got to
got
get a
West Los
resolution in.
An- 11, I have West Los Angeles, Venice, those are the two, and Mar Vista are the three in Council District 11.
Is there a list of
Look behind you. Second,
And apparently, an
Del Rey.
unofficial Del Rey.
now see, you didn't even ask for any proof of ID or anything.
or
Thank you for illustrating my point. Here's my other question, because I asked, why are we doing 1 and 2 before we do 3? It would seem reasonable to do 3 first. And I get your point that if we don't get going, it'll be too late. If we do 1 and 2 and then we don't like the answers to 3, do we still have the opportunity to say, this does not look like it's ready and we should not be going forward?
Yes, absolutely. We can pull the plug anytime.
Okay. I'm much more comfortable with that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Englander.
Thank you. So I almost agree with everything that was said, but not entirely. Couple questions. Is because this is a pilot, is the vendor giving us a little bit of a discount?
I would say yes, even though they didn't couch it in those terms. For the longest time, they were unwilling to do any. What was the dollar amount, Chris, that they were originally?
I think somewhere along, I think 450, it was supposed to be about 450.
450,000, and that was whether you did 1 or 50. And
Right.
And then the question went back to them is, what if we only did a certain, a very small number? If we did 10, so they gave us quotes for 10, and then they gave us quotes for doing 30 more. But unfortunately, we're not at a point in time where we think we can handle more than 10. We do not want to take on the
I understand
responsibility
that.
of more than 10.
So we're looking at, because based on the 10, just extrapolating that out, it's about 10 grand a piece.
Correct.
And then, so at 100, we're looking at significant dollars at that point.
Right.
Well
There's an
beyond.
economy of scale. Once they did give us quotes for if, Chris, you want to go ahead and do you have it?
So for example, for 20 neighborhood councils, after the initial 10, it would be 130,000. Then from 20 to 30, 20.
What would it be
30,
for all 100?
They estimate about 370,000.
About 370. And staff time on that, do we have a cost estimate on all staff costs on,
On the 370, no. I mean, on all 90, no.
no?
We only have for doing the 10 of that 215,000.
Right. So we don't really know true cost on what it would cost the city if we went citywide on this.
No, not
with a vendor and staff. We have
We've not costed that out, but we can. What we did was for the 10,
right.
the vendor we are charging that, or they're charging us 100,000, and the 115,000 is going to the clerk.
Okay. So I'm going to take a couple different perspectives on this. First, being financial. On that front is my concern on the financial side of it, which is my least of the concerns. But on the financial side of it, usually when we look at, or I look at a pilot program, the idea of that is it's a pilot, meaning that if it works out well, we're going to expand it, not do a pilot one-off. That would be a one-time program. But this is a pilot. The intention usually for me is on a pilot program, it means that we're going to test it. We're going to work out the bugs and the kinks. And if it really works, roll it out everywhere, right? And so usually on that, it's sort of akin to test driving a car. I would never go out and test drive a car unless I knew what was the total sticker, what was the cost going to be, and what options we were going to look at. So what are the full costs? If we're going to pilot something, no matter what that pilot might be in LA on some new program, then what are we really looking at on a vote to approve that pilot if we were taking it citywide, all in, staff time, including vendor costs? I'm just making a statement.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's just where I'm coming from. So on the financial side of it, I do have concern not knowing eyes wide open, because then all of a sudden we come back and say, oh, it worked great. Okay. And we worked out the bugs, and now we're going to go citywide. And oh, by the way, we're probably looking at $1 million. I mean, we just don't know. So that's a little bit of a concern, but again, the least of my concerns. My biggest concern is more along the lines of where our chairman opened it up with, and that is that the target market on this, our audience, our stakeholders, the key constituencies that vote in these elections aren't, in the technical sense, voters, if you will. These are local stakeholders, and there's a difference. And we still have the issue of defining what stakeholder means. I did have the experience, as many of my colleagues have, where neighborhood council, who are not public officials but strictly advisory under the charter to the elected body, and that's important to note. Stakeholder is very loosely defined. And with that, I had the experience, as others have, where there was a school in my district, a private school looking to expand, and they could not get the support of the local neighborhood council. So instead, they took over the neighborhood council, the entire neighborhood council, and then voted for the expansion of the school and won. In fact, the Daily News did a very interesting op-ed piece on this, or editorial on this, because the neighborhood council members were so upset over this that they actually went to the Daily News and asked them to write an editorial. So the Daily News did, and the editorial said, this was great that this school did this because this is democracy, hate the game, not the player. And said, democracy is a bad form of government, but it's also the best one that's ever been created. And it went on to say that then it's incumbent upon the local community to get involved. It was interesting, but it was an experience. And then after they got the school expanded, they all resigned from the board, and the old players came back. We had celebrities coming to vote and all kinds of people that didn't live in the area, but they were stakeholders because their kids went to the school. Long story short is the idea and the concept for me of neighborhood councils, which are a great grassroots organization about people that are involved and care a lot about what happens on their own block, in their own neighborhood. This is the most basic form of grassroots governance that I've ever seen. And I've been president of my HOA, I've been involved on a lot of different fronts with a lot of different organizations, and this takes that away. This takes away the spirit on online voting, again, not registered voters. It's not about, and for me, I want to see as many voters participate in as many elections as possible. We should, early voting is great, early registration is great, allowing now with what our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, did with getting 16 and 17-year-olds in the state of California to pre-register is awesome. I mean, I love these opportunities, but not for neighborhood councils. It's a completely different animal, and it really is. And for me, it's really about that. It's not about just getting voter numbers up. I want people to actually go to the meetings. I want people to weigh in on local issues and really participate. And those are the folks you really want voting and engaging on neighborhood councils. My big concern on this, and I'll close with this, is that if it comes time for a developer, if you will, because that's where we really see most of the activity and people participating in local grassroots efforts in this city, as in their community, the most disruptive thing you can bring is a change, and often those are development projects. If they go out and do online links to get folks and their supporters to register to vote in that one neighborhood council and take it over like we did see in a school where they wanted to expand, it would be very easy. It absolutely will be done, much harder than organic folks turning out at a neighborhood council election. So for me, supporting even a pilot, we don't know the financial cost citywide. A pilot means that if it works, we should go everywhere. I'm not sure the list of the 22. I'm only aware of one or two in the city that have very specific issues where it's very different. And we're trying to apply, for me, a one-size-fits-all that just doesn't. I know we're trying to solve for those one or two. I'd be more inclined to support some kind of program that would allow those one or two and not just randomly pick 10 out of the air. I don't even know how the 10 are selected out of the 22. Who picks those? How? What's the methodology on that?
We'd have to report back. That's part of the report
So,
back.
so to give money and then report back goes back to Mike Bonin's theory. So for me, this does not kill it by voting no. This postpones it. There's a difference. And I think there are too many questions on the table for me to support it at this point.
So just in response to the pilot program definition argument that you made, Mr. Englander, I don't think that it should imply, if we were to take a step forward in trying a new approach, that that implies that we're committed to the full approach. In fact, quite to the contrary. It is the nature of the neighborhood council movement that each neighborhood council is intended to be unique, to determine its own processes, its own rules. That was baked into this process from the very beginning of it. And so it might very well be that after conducting a pilot program, only 2 neighborhood councils decide that they're interested in online voting. Or it might be that 80 decide and 20 decide that, no, it's not for us. That could be totally, it will be the results of the pilot program that will, I think, guide neighborhood councils in making that determination of their own. And then as far as we're concerned, before we were to write the big check for a citywide program, this gives us an opportunity to assess cost effectiveness too. Because if the argument is that online voting will improve participation, well, let's find out. Because if we're going to spend $200,000 and see a 1% increase or no increase in participation, that's going to tell me that $200,000 would have been a lot better spent on outreach. But I feel that way, but I don't know that. And I won't know that until we get the results. So that's why I'm fine with moving forward with a small, toe in the water, even though I'm far from okay with a comprehensive, wider approach. Let me just throw out one other concern that I have that I hope will be taken into account if we should decide to move forward, as I'm suggesting, with the pilot program. And that is equity. We heard some of the comments from the public about barriers to voting, and especially generational barriers, and people don't carry stamps anymore and so on. Okay. You can vote for the President of the United States now with essentially no effort. You can sit there in your jammies and vote for President of the United States and drop it in the mail and you're done. There is very little barrier to entry in participation in democracy. You can show up at the polling place and say, I would like to vote for President of the United States, and California law does not allow that registrar to ask you to show your ID. That's how easy it is. And yet when we're, talking about neighborhood council elections, now we're talking about making it, even easier to do that. The marginal difference in ease of voting seems to me fairly slight. But we have a huge digital divide in this country. And we have a class of people who have, $800 phones and who have, full familiarity with every nuance of technology, which everyone here knows is not me. But we have a whole bunch of people in this country too who are lucky if they ever get access to a computer in their school or in their public library or otherwise. And they sure don't have, 5 different digital devices at home in their living room. So there is a fundamental equity problem when you put a digital layer on top of a democratic process. And I'm not saying it's a problem that can't be overcome, but it's a real problem. And it needs to be, dealt with thoughtfully, I think, and respectfully to ensure that if our goal is public participation, our goal should be public participation by everyone, regardless of their income level, regardless of their station in life, regardless of anything else. So that's my final comment about what I hope will come out of this pilot program and in the reports back. So members, any other questions or comments? Because I'm going to recommend that we approve the item as amended to instruct the clerk ITA, and Dunn to report following the elections with a complete after-action report and audit the results of the race with the elections with Everyone Counts. And then I'd also like to add to that the request that Ms. Walcott, you report, or actually maybe jointly with Ms. Liu, that you report back to this committee about the selection, about the method of selection of the neighborhood councils that the program will be applied to among those who've applied.
Yeah, I think that's part of the original motion, but yes, we will report back.
Okay, well then, it doesn't need to be amended then, I guess, in that respect. Okay, so that's my proposal. Mr. Englander has indicated he's a no. Members? Okay, Mr. Blumenfield's an aye.
You had me back and forth on that last statement there. I'll reluctantly go forward, although I'm interested in potentially pulling the plug if this is looking like it's going south.
All right.
We've got to get this right.
All right, thank you very much. Then by 3-1, it will be the action of the committee to approve my recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the members of the public who came down to join us.